Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I hope everybody is ready for an absolutely amazing day and ready for an incredible weekend as well. Very excited because we have another one of our Weaver alumni and Los Alamitos High School graduating seniors. We have Kirsten Okamoto, who will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then our own amazing ambassador lead, Mrs. Lysa Gamboa-Levy, will be continuing our story with Blue 55 and finding out whether or not they're going to make it in time to meet this amazing whale. She'll be reading chapters 35 and 36 in Song for a Whale. So I hope everybody has an absolutely amazing day. I know you're going to be incredible. I love you all. Go crush it.
Good morning, Weaver Whales. My name is Kirsten Okamoto, and I'm a Weaver alum. I'm graduating from Sato Academy of Math and Science, and in the fall, I will be attending UC Santa Barbara, majoring in electrical engineering. My favorite memory from Weaver was dancing and singing in the Weaver Talent Show with all of my friends. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone could please stand and remove their caps and hoods and place the right hand over their heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Okay, so we're going to do our school pledge right now. And we're going to go ahead and start up at the top. What's in red? So if you want to start with me there, that would be great. Ready? Begin. This day has been given to me fresh and new. I can learn from it, or I can throw it away. I will choose to do my best in thoughts, words, and actions. Today, I will be a star. I will stop, think, and act responsibly. Nice job.
Weaver whales, yeah, we're Weaver whales. We're the smartest creatures in the sea. Weaver whales, yeah, we're Weaver whales. We're gonna be the best we can be. You know this day has been given to me fresh and new. I can learn from it or throw it away. I will choose to do my best in thoughts and words and actions. Today I will be a star. Yeah, I will stop, think, and act responsibly. Weaver whales, yeah, we're Weaver whales. We're the smartest creatures in the sea. Weaver whales, yeah, we're Weaver whales. We're gonna be the best we can be. We're gonna be the best we can be. We're gonna be the best we can be. Weaver whales!
Now that Blue 55 was singing again, I could keep better track of where he was. But there was nothing to do except let the ship bring us closer. Even if we did get to the sanctuary on time, I wouldn't get to see him. The expedition crew wasn't even willing to take a speaker on board to play the song, so they sure weren't going to pick up a stray girl. Maybe I'd at least get to see Blue 55 swimming, if he decided to hang around the sanctuary. Even from a distance, I could recognize his glow spout. That would have to be enough, since he wasn't going to hear the song I'd made for him. He still wouldn't know anyone heard him. When I got back home, I'd send the song to more sanctuaries along the path. Maybe one of them would play it when he swam by. I wouldn't be there to meet him, but he'd know he wasn't alone. The train that Benny showed us was a scenic ride that a lot of cruise passengers took during the port stop at Cape Oliver. The round-trip ride took 3 hours, and it stopped at the halfway point for a break so people could get out to take pictures and buy lunch. Instead of getting on the train to ride back to the ship, Grandma and I would catch a shuttle to Lighthouse Bay. If we got there before Blue 55 did, we'd hang around until he arrived, even if it meant missing the rest of the cruise. I didn't want to think about the other thing that might happen. We could get to Lighthouse Bay to find that Blue 55 had already come by and gone. That afternoon, I joined Benny and Sura on a bridge for the fjord tour. Sir would make announcements about the scenery and wildlife around us as the ship sailed through the narrow passage with walls of glaciers on either side. Benny said a local pilot would get on board to help the captain. I'd thought pilots were only for flying planes, but it turns out that was also what they call people who steer ships. Anyway, this local pilot, who knew the area a lot better than the captain, would guide the ship around the ice so we wouldn't crash into anything. The ship eased into the narrow passage of the fjord. Ice bobbed in the water, pushed aside by the waves created by the ship. Seals lounged in the base of the mountain and on the ice floes. The ice reflected more shades of blue I didn't have names for. I never knew snow cone syrup blue was a color found in nature. I closed my eyes for a few seconds to see if I could still picture it. Maybe I'd never see another glacier again, so I wanted to hold on to that color. Benny tapped my arm, then pointed to the right after I opened my eyes. "Watch," she signed. At first I didn't see what I was supposed to be looking at. Then blocks of ice tumbled into the water next to us, making waves that splashed into the rocks. I pointed and shrugged to Benny. How she knew that was going to happen. She pointed to her ear. So they'd heard it? Some kind of sound warned of the glacier breaking apart. More chunks of the ice crashed into the water. Melting ice always looked so quiet, but this was noisy. The counter in front of us wasn't vibrating when I touched it, so it was a different kind of sound than the foghorn. Benny pointed to the glacier next to us, then wrote, "Calving on your notepad." On our notepad. I looked back at the glacier, still wondering what such a crashing and falling apart sounded like. She signed something that looked like break and then watch. A giant block of ice separated from the glacier and floated away from the mountain. On the page where Benny had written calving, I added, "Like a baby glacier?" "Yep, a glacier calf," she wrote. "What does it sound like?" She covered her ears and said, "Loud." "What kind of loud?" I wrote. "Really loud." But there were all kinds of loud. I knew that much. Was it a scream? A crash? Maybe the opposite of a crash. Whatever it was, since this was a ripping apart. Benny tapped the pen against her mouth like she was thinking. She could tell I wanted to know more, even without my asking her. Then she wrote, "Thunder." I never would have guessed that two totally different events could make the same sound. She wrote more notes and used some signs to tell me what her mom was announcing. "Air bubbles have been trapped under the ice for hundreds of years. All that pressure squishes them out of shape. When the ice melts or breaks away, the bubbles make a loud pop, like they were screaming out after being trapped for so long." I pointed to the seals and wrote, "The noise doesn't bother them?" She shook her head. "They hang out here on purpose. The glacier noise makes it hard for the orcas to hear them. Like with the humpbacks bubbling net feeding, I wondered how the seals figured out that a noise could help them. Instead of using it to get food like the whales did, the seals used it to avoid becoming food." The ship inched along through the fjord. Looking ahead, I didn't see how we'd be able to squeeze through the narrow space between the mountains. As we got closer, I saw that there was plenty of water on either side of us. Still, the pilot had to drive slowly because of all the floating ice. Most looked like chunks that the ship could easily knock aside, but Benny said we were just looking at the tops of those chunks and that most of the ice was below the surface. We were only part way through the fjord when the ship stopped completely. The pilot talked to the captain while pointing to the water ahead of us, then shook her head. Then the captain picked up the microphone. The engine jerked and we started inching backward. The front of the ship turned bit by bit to the left. I shrugged at Benny, then pantomimed turning a big wheel, even though no one actually turned a wheel to steer a ship. "We're turning around?" Benny pointed to the floating ice in the water and signed, "Dangerous." Then she took the notepad and wrote that the captain had just announced Sometimes you have to know when it's time to give up and turn back. Did you see the glacier calving? I asked Grandma when I got back to the room. No, that must have been on the other side of the ship. I saw ice rolling off the side of the mountain, but nothing breaking apart like that. What was it like? Beautiful and sad at the same time. That wasn't enough. How could I possibly describe what it was like to witness a glacier tearing apart? I sat across from Grandma and said, "Handshake poem?" She didn't hesitate or dismiss as Grandpa's thing this time. "What shape?" she asked. I held up my hands into fives, like in Grandpa's tree poem, but bent my fingers into claws. A good shape for frozen things in mountains and floating ice, spreading out fingers to show something big and bent to show the jagged peaks. It was also the handshake for signing frozen and rough, so it was perfect for a poem about the icy mountain of the breaking glacier. First I signed frozen, then reached up to trace rising and falling curves of mountain tops. My hands showed Grandma the layers of ice that pressed down and trapped the pockets of air inside. With spinning hands, I showed chunks of ice tumbling down and crashing to the ocean, making rough waves. Then I held them out for the bigger block of glacier, breaking and drifting away. The glacier screams, watching a piece of itself floating farther and farther from home. Grandma joined in when she could see the glacier calving too. The new iceberg rides the rough waves in the sea. Her hands outlined its shape, smaller and jagged with new breaks. I showed her that what was left of the glacier clung to the mountainside. It looked rougher than with sharp edges marking the missing ice. She raked her hands as if they were claws on the glacier and then straightened her fingers a little to draw softer waves, the scars of the melting ice. The new iceberg drifted so far away it was a speck in the ocean. Time and distance smoothed out the memory of what was lost. I didn't know anymore if we were still talking about the iceberg or about 55 and me or my family or my grandma and grandpa. Maybe it was all those things. I woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep, so I went to the internet cafe to check on Blue 55's progress. My phone couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi from our cabin. It was so early the gelato wasn't even out yet. I'd have to work without it. The sanctuary's website didn't have any updates, so I switched over to the map that showed where 55 was. He was making progress. Too much progress. A TV screen above me showed the cruise ship's route. With the stops we'd be making along the way, 55 was going to get to Oregon long before we did, if he kept up this pace. All along, I was in such a hurry to meet him, and now I just wanted him to wait for me. Please slow down. I touched the blinking blue dot on the screen as if I could hold him in place. I imagined myself chasing him across the ocean forever, never getting close enough to even catch a sight of his breath. I tried so hard to do everything right, to do what was best for Blue 55. He needed to hear that song. I was sure of that. It looked more and more like I'd have to go back home without having played it for him or seeing him at all. The more I tried to reach him, the farther he swam away. Before leaving, I checked my email, even though I cringed while opening it. If anyone at home was in a panic about us, I wanted to send a reply that would calm them down. The first was from Tristan. "Iris, I can't believe y'all did this. I know you've both told Mom you're okay, but tell me for real. Is everything all right? I don't know what I can do from here if it isn't, but tell me where you are and we'll help you if you need it. Right back to Dad, too. Mom says he hasn't been sleeping since you left. Love you even though you're totally ridiculous. Tristan." I couldn't believe Dad was so worried that he wasn't sleeping. I opened his last email to me. "Iris, you know that record I showed you with the whale songs? I don't know if I told you that a copy of it is in space. The Voyager space capsule. It's true. It's carrying a lot of things from Earth, including the whale song record. If there's an alien life out there somewhere, the item in the capsule will let them know what life is like on Earth. Maybe one day someone will figure out what the song means. I know I told you I wanted you to find those whales when I heard them. But even if I had, Even if they were right in front of me, I wouldn't have known what to say. Please let me know how you're doing. Better yet, tell me where you are. I'm worried sick. You can't imagine how much I miss you. Love, Dad. At the breakfast buffet, I found a small table near a window. I never thought I'd miss the school's cafeteria, but I'd wondered how everyone at school was doing, what they'd been talking about at lunch while I was gone. Most of the time I felt invisible, but they had to notice I was gone, right? Maybe Nina found someone new to bother by now. I laughed and took a bite of my cheese omelet. And what about Mr. Charles? A pang of guilt hit my stomach when I realized I hadn't even thought of him much. He told me before that whenever I was absent, he went to work at one of the schools with more deaf kids, helping out in classrooms or filling in for interpreters who were absent. People around me in the buffet area stopped eating and looked up like they were all listening to something. Some of them shoveled in the last bite of food as they stood up and they ran out. I finished my mango juice and followed the stampede out to the deck. On my notepad, I wrote, "What's going on?" and showed it to an old woman next to me. After reading the question, she cupped her hands around her mouth and yelled, "Whales!" at my face. There wasn't a whale sighting announcement on the schedule for the day, but obviously whales didn't always follow a schedule. Maybe Sura had spotted them and went to the bridge to announce the unplanned whale sighting. Each time I saw a group of passengers pointing at something, they were always on the opposite side of the ship. Sometimes they laughed and clapped. The whales must have breached, putting on a show for whoever was watching. Then I'd switch sides to get a better view of the action, and the people on the side I just left would be pointing, laughing, and clapping things. Whales were swimming right near the ship, and I missed out on every one of them. I stamped my foot on the deck, angry all over again about the sanctuary not using my idea. Blue 55 was going to be right there, and they weren't going to play the song I'd worked so hard to make for them. After about an hour, the crowd thinned out when there were no more leaping whales to see. Passengers returned to the pools and the bars and the dining rooms. The breeze chilled my face as I leaned against the railing and watched the waves. I tucked my scarf under the front of my coat. My heart beating against my hand reminded me of Blue 55's song, so I kept it there. Yes, things had turned out terribly, but I was on a ship sailing over the ocean. Not a bad place to remarkably fail. I'd made it that far, and I tried really hard to help out one whale. I stared out at the water that was so calm it had to be as quiet for everyone else as it was for me. Then a plume of teardrop-shaped spray interrupted, and another spray, smaller than the first. The shadows of two whalebacks brushed the surface. Humpbacks, if I remembered right, from what Sir and Benny had taught me. One large and one small. A mother and a calf. I looked around the other passengers. No one else seemed to have noticed. It was almost like it hadn't happened. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. When I looked back, the Y shape of two whale flukes lifted up from the surface and then sank down. "Thank you," I signed to them. Then I laughed. Those whales showed up right when I needed them. I wasn't mad anymore about missing the breaching humpbacks with the rest of the crowd. The mother and the calf sighting was mine alone. "Gelato time?" Benny asked when I caught up with her later. It did sound good, since I hadn't eaten for about 2 hours. The ship was on its way to the next stop, Icy Harbor. We planned to stay aboard since Benny said there wasn't much to see there. "What flavor?" I asked when we got to the cafe. "Church," she signed. I held back a giggle and wrote, "Not for me, tastes like bricks." Benny's forehead crinkled with confusion, and then she pointed to the chocolate label behind the glass. I showed her how to draw circles with the letter C on the back of her hand instead of tapping it for church. She laughed at her mistake when she caught on. I wish Mr. Charles had been there to see it. After we stopped giggling, we picked up chocolate and pistachio and spooned some into each other's bowl until we each had a perfect chocolate pistachio blend. We settled into our seats by the window and checked out the map of 55's path. The blue dot seemed to be racing to Oregon. How could he have covered so many miles since we had last checked? Benny looked worried too and checked the ship's route on the TV screen like I had. Maybe he'll slow down. Yeah, hopefully, I answered. Nothing I can do from here. I sighed and brought up my email to see what was new from home. After asking me to reply back with more than, "We're fine," Mom wrote, "I went to school to collect your work for you to catch up on when you're back. I don't like you missing so much. I had to think of something to tell the office that didn't sound completely ridiculous, like that you and your grandmother took off on a trip to who knows where. I told them there'd been a family emergency and you'd be back next week. That's all I knew from what you and your grandma had told me. Oh, and when I was in the office, I saw that girl Nina. Isn't that who you got into trouble for shoving? She seemed really nice. She says she hopes you're okay and that you inspired her to learn sign language." Usually, when people use a phrase like "fell over laughing," they mean it as a figure of speech. I laughed really hard, is what they mean. But I actually fell over laughing at that. I sat on the floor next to the computer and wiped tears from my eyes. Whenever I tried to explain to Benny what was so funny, I'd start laughing all over again. Finally, I stood up and turned the computer screen to Benny so she could read the email. Then I pointed to the last line. "She's terrible," I signed. On the computer notepad, I added, "She's always signing, but I never have any idea what she means. It's like she gets worse every day instead of better. Maybe that library book she checked out is for some other country's sign language because it's nothing I know." Benny shrugged and typed, "It's nice that she wants to learn anyway. Not that nice if she won't even listen when I tell her I don't understand her. Anyway, not much point if it's that bad." After reading my message, Benny wrote, "Probably no worse than you speaking whale, right?"